Hello gentlemen, I am Vitold and this video is the most exciting to me personally out of all the comparisons that I've been preparing for you guys. The two motorcycles that it's about, so BMW R1250 GS and KTM 1290 Super Adventure S and R, as I'll be mentioning both versions here to create the most complete guide. These big adventure bikes may be the two most exciting ones in the whole category of big adventure bikes. And I'm totally serious here. They are so much different in how they do things, how they approach things, that it's hard to find other bikes that would be so far from each other and at the same time both would be so desired by so many of us. So in this video I'm going through a pretty demanding and extensive list in which I'm comparing the two for you guys. I have ridden all current big adventure motorcycles on the market and some older ones as well. I do not own a GS nor a Super Adventure. I am also not cooperating with any of the manufacturers and I do not need to ask them to give me those bikes as I rent them myself. In other words, I'm not a journalist, I don't live off of YouTube, so I may tell you how they really are based on my own experiences, and I think that this is how it should be done here. I will point you to a winner in every category, and the winner of the largest number will not automatically be a winner of the whole comparison, since different categories weigh differently. Fuel tank size is a relatively not important thing comparing to performance, to handling and suspension comfort. So do not worry about that. I will explain the reasons why I think that a certain bike is better in a given category. I will also sum it all up in the end, and I will tell you which one I would buy myself and why. So let's go to the first, and this comparison starts with engine and performance. BMW R1250 GS has a two-cylinder boxer engine with 1254 cubic centimeters of displacement, 136 horsepower and 143 Nm of torque, while KTM 1290 Super Adventure S and R both also have a two-cylinder engine, but in a V shape, with a bit more displacement also at 1301 cubic centimeters. There is 18% more power at 160 horsepower in total for KTM and 3% less torque than GS at 138 Nm. On paper KTM wins, and in real life KTM not only wins but smashes the GS here. R1250 GS is a quick bike with great flexibility thanks to plenty of torque, relatively low RPM range and adequate gearing. That's all done very correctly, I think. It takes off in a way an electric engine does, so instantly with all that torque coming into play from the lowest RPM. It's very nice and helpful when overtaking and without the need of reducing gears at the same time. This also matters when you are riding with a passenger and a lot of luggage, so more weight. But KTM is on a whole different level and it's lightning quick, also at pretty much any RPM. GS delivers power in a more linear way and it gets a bit tired also at higher RPM, shaking a little bit and vibrating, while on a KTM, the higher you rev, the more fun you are both having. Bike. There's really not that much comparison here when it comes to that craziness, and KTM gives you a shot of adrenaline whenever you want it, while the GS isn't that powerful, isn't that impressive here. Part of the reason why KTM does so great is also here appropriate gearing. So the gears not being too long and making the bike sloppy at the same time, but also not too short, making you switch gears constantly and taking some of the fun away. It's also plenty flexible due to the high torque that it's got, and it reacts to throttle instantly while not being nervous at all. So it's really balanced and fun thing to work with. Both bikes have adequate heat management. It's okay, and you won't be uncomfortable with them even during an aggressive ride in the city, unless it's very, very hot outside, as then KTM may get warm. But it's possible that I did feel that, since it really made me ride like crazy, especially the R. I don't think that I have ever pushed a GS that much, so overall I'm saying that both of these bikes are good in heat management. KTM's engine feels much smoother and with better manners than BMW, which is clunky in a way that you experience it. So with vibration growing the closer you get to the red line and starting to sound as if it is going to have a heart attack. So yes, KTM wins hands down, and this is a pretty easy win for it. The next point of the comparison is a completely different story though, as it's handling. Note here that KTM in the S version rides very differently than the R, and I've got a video listing the differences between them and some other observations in a description. The R version is really good at low speeds, so when maneuvering, when riding between the cars, when crawling around, and whatever you do up to, let's say, 30 to 40 kilometers per hour. It is very precise, it's super stable, and you've got full control over it. It's very surprising and very enjoyable at the same time. It is a great bike to ride in the city because of that. Filtering on it is pure pleasure, it's very tall. Now the S version is different, especially after dealers tightened the head bearing due to KTM's recommendation, which I was rather unlucky to experience after riding the R variant, which didn't have that done. Now this seems to make the handlebar move much harder in the S version, which I don't know if that's the only one that's going to be or that already is affected. It makes it feel like it isn't happy to cooperate at lower speeds. This might help in solving the wobble, the handlebar shaking issue that some riders report, but then it screws up the low speed control as you struggle with the steering. This bike, this S variant, wasn't happy in the city at all, and I just wanted to get out of there. A complete opposite to the R version. The R is, in my opinion, one of the best here inside the city at low speeds. Then BMW R1250 GS is just a tiny bit better, thanks to its super low center of gravity and awesome control of the front wheel due to having that famous telelever suspension that prevents diving. It's almost fully eliminating this motion. You've got more control, and GS is the king when it comes to low speed handling, and it carries the crown of a tiny bit better bike for city riding even than the 1290 Super Adventure R, and a hell of a better bike to ride there than the S version. However, now at higher speeds, and when you actually have to start leaning left and right to turn on those motorcycles, things change. The advantage of the R version of the KTM disappears, and it's the S variant that does it better at high speeds. It is more neutral when in a lean. It is much more eager to start turning and start leaning and turning, rather, while the R version feels as if it wanted to only keep going straight at speeds. It's really hard to make it quickly start leaning and turning, and feels like riding a tree sitting on top of it. It ain't easy. The S is significantly better, but still a very far away from the eagerness of a BMW R1250 GS to turn, to switch directions, to maintain the lean regardless of if you start accelerating or using the brake. The GS does whatever you want, however you want it, exactly actually however you want it and when you want it. It cannot be beaten by either of the KTMs in terms of handling, and the closest the two brands and two models are here is at the lowest speeds when we're talking about the R variant of the KTM and the GS. So the situation totally reverses here, and the GS demolishes the KTMs, taking a very, very strong win. It's just so super pleasant to ride and allows you to enjoy the ride, the flow, the motion itself, as it's just so easy and just so encouraging. Now let's head to the next category, which is suspension. KTM 1290 Super Adventure S, just like the GS, has electronically adjustable suspension. The R variant has manually adjustable suspension, different suspensions as well. So the S version can be very comfortable in the comfort setting, yet still without getting to the jelly-like point and being all over the place at the same time. It's a really good setting for a highway or for a long, relaxing, not too fast ride. It soaks the bumps really well. It can have an option of an anti-dive front fork engaged. If you have that option, that reduces the front suspension dive. It seems to have an effect, as this bike does not dive too much, I think. That's unusual in this category, and also helps when braking. So it's a composed bike, this S variant, in terms of suspension, that can also get pretty stiff in the sportiest suspension setting while staying still usable, so not too crazy harsh and stiff. The R version in its default setting is pretty stiff, and riding over rough stuff on the roads makes you feel it all. It's definitely not as comfortable as the S, at least in the factory settings. The electronically adjustable suspension in BMW R1250 GS isn't as impressive, and the changes in its behavior depending on the mode are not that big compared to what KTM in the S variant can do when going from sporty to comfy, and also the other way around. GS is more in the middle somehow, while being pleasant to ride in terms of comfort. At the same time, I feel that they can be equally comfortable here, while the KTM has more interesting settings that influence the way it rides, and BMW is having that amazing frontal lever suspension that gives so many other benefits in other circumstances that I feel it still can give us more when we consider the behavior when braking and also influencing the way the bike handles. So BMW wins this one despite having less ground clearance at 18.5 centimeters and 19 centimeters of front wheel travel and 20 centimeters of the rear wheel travel versus 22.4 centimeters of ground clearance in the Super Adventure S, 24.2 centimeters in the R, and also 20 centimeters of suspension travel in the front and also in the rear in the S variant. That's very similar to the GS, and then 22 centimeters in the front and the rear in the R version. Now let's talk about the seat and how comfortable the seating position is on BMW and on KTM's. R1250 GS has a much wider handlebar, which makes you feel more in control, and it likely does provide you more of it. The seat is also softer than in both KTM's, especially in the S, which is horribly hard and uncomfortable to me. BMW could have a softer seat, but again, to me it is much better than whatever you can find in the KTM's, especially the S. The seat height on the GS is 85 centimeters and it can be raised to 87 centimeters, and it's exactly the same in the KTM Super Adventure in the S variant, also 85 and 87. Super Adventure R has a seat that is fixed at 88 centimeters, and somehow it makes the position on it make you feel more in control than on the S version. You're also further from foot pegs that are located pretty high anyway, and so actually both versions of the KTM may not feel as comfortable after a while as a GS. The position of foot pegs on a GS should be better for majority of us, and the knee angle is also more relaxed. It might be more comfortable. On both the GS and KTMs you're sitting upright, that's nice, but GS scores in this category more. I consider it visibly more comfortable in all aspects of position and also in terms of the seat itself. However, check the position on a KTM in the R variant, which feels very cool as it's kind of stimulating and engaging, very fun. And also remembering that I lifted the seat of the S version to 87 centimeters, and it did feel better to me. I'm 1 meter 83 centimeters tall, or 6 feet tall, but somehow still it was not as engaging as on the R. So another fun fact about these two. But the winner in my eyes is BMW here. KTM's steak Wiener Schnitzel, yeah, BMW is German, and KTM, despite also having 3 letters in the name, is Austrian. Close, but not the same. The office chair that I'm sitting on is also more German, as the base is the same as a comfort pack seats in BMW 7 Series flagship limousine. It doesn't get better than that, and there's a link to those in the description of the video if you would want to see what the perfection in terms of office chairs looks like. Now the next category is wind protection, and my 1290 Super Adventure S had a short windshield installed that originally is in the R variant, so I could not test the wind protection or an original windshield for this variant. This is actually not a key thing, as every bike so far in this category should have its windshield replaced with a taller aftermarket one, as I believe only that would give you a smooth experience. GS is not bad here, and it doesn't generate any turbulences with its stock windshield, but of course your helmet is not perfectly protected from an airstream even in the tallest position. And exactly, this is what we can compare, the adjustment systems, as both bikes and both KTM variations have by default adjustable windshields that are operated differently between BMW and KTM. In a GS you're getting a knob, while in KTMs you're getting 2 knobs. Is 2 better? Anyway, as you can see, their locations are different also, and those in KTM work quicker, I feel. They're also lighter to move and lighter to adjust. However, this was the case of the brand new R version, while the S, it was treated with some off-roading, I think, and the system wasn't working as smoothly anymore. Perhaps if it was deeply washed, it could be fixed, but it seems to be exposed enough to catch all sorts of dirt, road debris and sand, so be careful there. The knobs are also on both sides, which means that they can be easily used with either hand. It seems that if KTM's solution was more protected and reliable, it would be a clear winner. But without the original windshield on the S version, I cannot give you the verdict. If any of you has ridden a GS and 1290 Super Adventure S with its original windshield and was able to compare wind protection, please do let us know which one you like better, and I'm leaving this category without choosing a winner. Obviously the R variant gives you no protection, so that would be a sore loser here. The category of brakes is challenging here in this comparison, but for different reasons, which are that both models have great brakes. Strong, easy to dose at all times, they are possible to use with one finger in terms of the front brake, and they just work well. On top of that, the KTM Super Adventure S with the anti-dive system makes the whole experience quite fine, but it's not anywhere near BMW's front tailor-lever suspension, which makes braking a true pleasure, and well, KTM just cannot come even near that. It's insane how it feels in BMW, but it makes you squeeze the lever harder and harder just for fun. Seriously, you won't know what it means until you try it yourselves. R1250 GS takes a massive win here thanks to this particular experience. Stopping power should be very similar, so it's not like KTM cannot stop, though they are very good, but they just cannot do it being almost completely flat, even with that anti-dive system in the S variant. It just can't give you so much control over the bike when doing so. Now about the drivetrain. We've got a serious difference here, since KTM uses chain drive with the double-sided swing arm and BMW has gone with a single-sided swing arm with a drive shaft incorporated into it years ago. Obviously, shaft drive is much more comfortable on a daily basis, since you may just forget about it, while with chain you cannot. And instead you have to buy and carry a spray can with you, then you have to stop every now and then to spray the chain, check its tension, service it by tightening once you assess that it's too stretched. You've got to clean all the mess and then also replace it along with the sprockets. No such things with BMW, and on top of that, those KTMs love to stretch their chains super early, making the maintenance even more annoying and costly. BMW absolutely wins here for me, and personally I think that it's a very meaningful victory, especially if you're thinking about touring. What about the fuel tanks? KTM has got a bigger tank at 23 liters versus 20 liters in a GS. On the other hand, you may go for a BMW R1250 GS Adventure with 30 liters. The capacity isn't actually the key, as on its own it means nothing, but only combined with fuel consumption gives you an information about the range. This though is depending on how we drive and how the bikes stimulate us, that I find it impossible to compare, and I don't believe any fuel consumption data from the manufacturers. Obviously, you also should not believe that. So having an option of a smaller tank and then a much larger tank, I'm giving it to the BMW because it's giving us flexibility. In terms of weight, KTM only provides dry weight at 220 kilograms for the S and 221 kilograms for the R, so counting fuel and some other fluids, let's assume that it's around 245 kilograms in total for both versions, somewhere around there. BMW R1250 GS is 249 kilograms, so let's say that, well, it's basically all the same. Now, BMW's weight totally disappears when you start moving, which doesn't happen in such obvious way with KTM's, but once you put the BMW on its side stand, it's leaning very much to the left and it becomes hard sometimes to get back up. Now, moving the bikes around, only Super Adventure R feels very hard to deal with because of its weight being high. The difference in data is so small, and the feeling of holding them straight when sitting on them is so similar that I cannot choose a winner here, and instead I'll call it a draw. But you know that KTM may be up to 4 kilograms lighter, even though this is just my quick estimation and not an official information from the KTM. In the next category of tech, we've got a front radar in the KTM Super Adventure S that BMW cannot have. We've got shaft drive then in the GS that both KTMs cannot have. Now all the bikes can have keyless ignition with keyless fuel caps, which is awesome. Also, all of them can have heated seats as long as KTM is the S version. They all have Corning LED front lights, fancy electronically adjustable suspensions, also that applies to the S variant. But it's KTM that has backlit switches on the handlebar, and it's also KTM that has an amazing display with animated options that make them clear and easy to understand. This is a lot of fun, and this impresses me more than the display on the BMW, and indeed it can make the bike feel more modern and more technologically advanced. The suspension is also more advanced in the S variant of the KTM when it comes to electronics. I'm not a fan of the radar solution and I wouldn't use it myself, but it's clear that KTM engineers have gone further playing with electronics and software here than BMW, at least in those areas. KTM feels more technologically advanced, so let's let it win in this category, even though BMW has an edge in front suspension and that drive shaft. When we talk about tech, purely electronics, that's going to be KTM. Now we're getting to the competition in engine and exhaust sound. And let me first say that KTM totally cut the balls of their 1290 Super Adventure bikes and they sound like mopeds instead. But if you put an aftermarket exhaust on them, they will rock it. Now, despite all this, GS sounds terribly to me, so it's obvious that this point has to go to the KTM. In terms of off-roading, I'm not scoring these bikes here as I haven't tried the KTMs off the road, and I think that despite all the marketing, they shouldn't probably be used for super heavy off-road conditions. They're just too heavy to comfortably use out there and too expensive to enjoy that, at least for me. I've been riding off-road for many years when I was younger, but that was on proper dirt bikes and still not hardcore racetracks. I wouldn't take either of these bikes out there, but if I was forced to, I would probably pick Super Adventure R due to the narrow front wheel and great balance when riding straight at lower speeds. So also like a GS, but with additional margin for some errors in the area of ground clearance and also suspension travel. GS has that nice wide handlebar, so that would be tempting, but I think I would stay with the KTM. But I haven't done that, so I cannot say officially and count it. But in the category of design, both bikes have their fans and both have haters around the world. BMW hasn't been revised for over 10 years, pretty much from 2013, except some little touches here and there, but I cannot say that it looks outdated. Yeah, I think it's all there still. It's got its own style, which I do like. However, I personally prefer looking at the KTMs both, especially with those orange colors. But let me ask you guys, as when speaking about the tastes, democracy is usually the way to go, so please tell me in the comments which you think looks better. Moving to the price and value for money. They are both pretty demanding here, with the base KTM 1290 Super Adventure S being the cheaper KTM. It's still 15% more expensive than a base BMW R 1250 GS. And no one buys a base GS, and usually they actually come at 10% more than a base 1290 Super Adventure S. But hey, KTM also usually gets some extra stuff. So concluding that usually they're listed for around the same, BMW technically can be cheaper still, while not providing much less than KTM. Remember that BMW also comes with shaft drive, and that counts. I think because of that, BMW wins here, to me, in terms of value for money. It's overall a bike that does everything well, except for the sound, it doesn't do anything particularly badly. And the last area to compare the bikes in is the X factor, and BMW handles so much better than KTM that it will be more fun for those who value fun on a twisty road. KTMs do provide insane performance that can make you happy on any road just by rolling the throttle wide open. BMW makes braking exciting. This is crazy. KTM will make you and also others excited when you replace the rear soda can with a real aftermarket exhaust. However, it's not stock, so perhaps we shouldn't count that. So as you see, it depends. But to me personally, I get a proper adrenaline kick when a proper V2 comes to life, and then when accelerating with such a crazy quick pace. So in the end of the day, I think there's a bit of X factor more in the KTMs, especially that they are more rare bikes. They're not as popular, so there's this something about them. So in conclusion, BMW R 1250 GS wins in handling, it wins in suspension and its comfort, in seat and position comfort, in brakes, drivetrain, fuel tank, and price and value for money. KTM smashes the BMW in the engine and performance, in tech, in sound, and the X factor. They tie in weight, and I cannot score wind protection. The design is up to you guys. I have a slight preference towards KTM. Now, which one would I buy and why? This has been on my mind for months now. I love the way BMW rides. I like its general style, I like its comfort, and the feeling that it's a good bike, knowing that it's a good bike and a solid choice that will not disappoint me anywhere until I start the engine and listen to that farting noise. Well, I just cannot stand it. It's something that just... I also value a lot KTM's performance, and in the R variant, the way that it's stable, the way that it just moves, flows through the traffic in the city, which is where I ride a lot. I would love its sound after replacing the exhaust, and I think I would just want to have something less popular than a GS myself, personally. In the end of the day, it would be between the S and the R versions, as I prefer the looks of the S and the idea of its fancy electronically adjustable suspension along with its comfort, but I just didn't enjoy riding it at low speeds, which is unacceptable for me. So I basically am answering my own dispute. Today I would likely end up with a KTM 1290 Super Adventure R. I also loved the position on it, this motivating, stimulating way of sitting on it. I will also, in a perfect world, get a GS at the same time for when I would like to enjoy the ride itself without getting too crazy with performance, or for a very long ride because it's more comfortable. This is how I see it, and hey, why not to have both if you can? If you'd like to see my in-depth and pretty brutal reviews of both of these KTMs and also of the BMW R1250 GS, then do head to the links in the description to get a full perspective. Have a good one and see you in those videos.